Bandidos provocan a forastero silencioso. Se arrepienten al enfrentar al más rápido del Oeste. The town of Dustfall lay under the harsh glow of twin suns. Red dust swirled in the narrow streets, catching the light and making the whole town look like it was burning. Hover wagons rattled over the wooden walkways, and the neon signs above the saloons buzzed softly in the dry wind. It was a place where law was a suggestion, and danger walked openly. No one in Dustfall noticed the silent stranger at first. He moved like a shadow, his long coat brushing the ground, boots leaving no dust mark. His hat was pulled low, hiding his eyes, and his hands were calm at his sides. There was something about him, something the townsfolk could not name, but they felt it. A presence, a quiet power that made the hair on the back of the neck rise. He stopped outside the Red Coyote Saloon. The swinging doors creaked as he pushed them open. Inside, the usual mix of gamblers, drunks, and bounty hunters turned to glance at him. He did not speak. He did not smile. He simply stepped forward and sat at a table near the wall, his hat still shadowing his face. The bartender, a tall man with a mechanical arm, raised an eyebrow. "We don't get many strangers around here," he said cautiously. The man said nothing. He simply placed a small coin on the table. The bartender took it, weighed it in his hand, and nodded. "Drink?" he asked. Again, no answer, just the faintest movement of the head. The bartender turned away. In the corner, a group of bandidos watched him closely. They were rough, scarred, and full of bravado. They had ridden into Dustfall just that morning, looking for trouble, or coin, whichever came first. And here, sitting quietly in their sight, was a stranger. Quiet, calm, too calm. One of the bandidos, a tall man with a burn scar over his right eye, whispered to the others, "Think he's soft? Looks like an easy mark to me." The others grinned. One cracked his knuckles. "Let's find out." They walked over to the stranger's table. Their boots thudded on the wooden floor. The stranger did not flinch. He did not even look up. "You new in town?" the tallest one asked, leaning over. His voice was rough, meant to provoke. Still no answer. Just silence. "Speak up, man," said another, shoving the stranger lightly. The table didn't move. The stranger didn't move. He remained calm, quiet, almost like he had not even noticed. The bandidos laughed. "Looks like a real coward," the scarred one said. "Sit here all day, not saying a word. Pathetic." Suddenly the stranger moved, but not like a man startled or angry. His hand came up slowly, very deliberately, brushing the side of his coat. The bandidos tensed. Something in his motion told them he was ready, but he did not draw his weapon. Not yet. He simply sat, and the silence that followed was heavier than any gunshot. The bandidos stared at each other. "He's messing with us," one muttered. "We don't like being made fools." A young girl sitting nearby delivering drinks peeked at him nervously. She had never seen a man so still, so confident without speaking. The stranger seemed calm, but he radiated an energy that made her stomach twist. He was not just calm, he was in control of everything. The bandidos decided to act. They thought a little scare would break him. One reached for a nearby deck of cards, knocking it to the floor. Another shoved the table. The stranger's eyes finally lifted. Just a faint glance, barely noticeable. It was enough. The smallest movement. But in that instant, the bandidos felt a chill. Something told them this was not a man they could bully. Still, they laughed it off. "Relax, it's just a drifter," one said. though his voice trembled slightly. By the time they left the saloon, they had drawn the attention of the townsfolk. Murmurs spread. "Who is that man? He does not speak, yet no one dares touch him." Outside, the stranger walked slowly down the dusty street. His coat moved with him like a shadow in motion. He did not hurry. He did not look around. Yet everyone felt his awareness. Eyes in windows, faces at doorways, even the horses seemed to sense him. The bandidos, however, were not done. They waited at the edge of town, hiding behind hover wagons and crates, whispering threats. "We'll teach him a lesson," said the scarred one. "He thinks he can just walk in here and scare us?" "No one does that to the Ridge Riders." Night fell. Twin moons rose over the horizon, casting pale light across the streets. Dustfall was quieter now, but the tension lingered like smoke. The stranger moved toward the center of town, passing the abandoned water tower and the flickering neon of the old telegraph office. He sensed them before he saw them. The bandidos had chosen the perfect night for an ambush, or so they thought. They stepped out from their hiding places, weapons drawn. Plasma pistols and electrified knives glimmered in the moonlight. The stranger stopped. He tilted his head slightly. No fear, no surprise, just a calm understanding. One of the bandidos stepped forward. "Thought you could just ignore us, huh?" He sneered. "We're going to teach you what happens to quiet men in Dustfall." The stranger's hand brushed the side of his coat again. This time, a faint hum was heard. The townsfolk, hiding behind walls, froze. In the blink of an eye, the stranger had moved. Not in a rush, not in panic, but faster than any human should be able to move. One of the bandidos' weapons was knocked away before he even pulled the trigger. Another felt a strong shove and went flying into a crate. Dust swirled around them as if caught in a sudden windstorm. Though the air was still, the stranger moved with precision, disarming and controlling the fight without a word. By the time it was over, the bandidos lay scattered, stunned and injured. Their pride shattered more than their bodies. The stranger stood alone in the moonlight, breathing evenly, his coat untouched, his calm unbroken. He did not celebrate. He did not even look at the townsfolk who had watched in awe from the shadows. He simply walked away. His footsteps made no sound on the dusty ground. By morning, tales of the silent stranger had spread. Children whispered about him on their way to school. Shopkeepers told each other in hushed voices. Even the sheriff, a man with a reputation for toughness, admitted to himself that he had never seen a human move like that. The bandidos would not forget tonight, and neither would the town. The stranger's arrival was more than a simple visit. It was a warning. Humans in this new frontier were not to be underestimated. Quiet men could be the fastest, the strongest, and the smartest, and sometimes they were more than anyone expected. As he walked toward the outskirts of Dustfall, the first hint of dawn touched the horizon. The town behind him was waking, unaware that its calm streets had been tested and had survived only by witnessing something extraordinary. The stranger disappeared into the morning light, leaving behind questions and whispers, and one truth: those who provoke humans may soon regret it. The morning sun burned over Dustfall, casting long shadows through the narrow streets. The town was quiet, but the whispers about the silent stranger never stopped. Merchants hung signs higher, children peeked from doorways, and the sheriff leaned on his post, thinking about the events of the previous night. The stranger had vanished before sunrise. Some said he walked out into the desert. Others swore he had simply disappeared. Yet his presence lingered in every corner, in every hushed conversation. But the bandidos were not done. Pride burned in their hearts. To be humiliated by one man, one quiet man, was impossible to forget. Scarred Ron, their leader, gathered the rest in a hidden alley outside town. "We can't let him make fools of us again," Ron growled. "He may be fast, but he's just one man. We're many. Tonight, we take what's ours." The others nodded, their confidence renewed by numbers. They had weapons, plasma pistols, energy whips, and shock knives. They had prepared traps, planned ambushes, and they had nothing to lose. Meanwhile, the stranger was already in Dustfall, observing from the edge of town. He moved silently along the rooftops, eyes scanning every street, every alley. He knew they were plotting. He did not rush. He did not panic. He simply watched. By nightfall, the bandidos were ready. They struck first at the town's trading post, firing their weapons into the air to create chaos. The traders and townsfolk ducked behind crates and walls, shouting in fear. But the stranger arrived before the first shot could hit an innocent. He moved like a shadow. Bullets and plasma bolts flashed around him, but they could not touch him. He ducked, rolled, and twisted with the speed that seemed impossible. One of the bandidos lunged with a shock knife, aiming for his chest, but the stranger's hand shot out, grabbing the attacker's wrist and twisting it until the weapon flew across the floor. The townsfolk gasped. They had never seen a human move like this. Every motion of the stranger was precise, calculated, and lightning fast. The bandidos fired wildly, but he dodged each shot without effort. Scarred Ron shouted from across the street, "Stop him! Kill him!" But it was too late. The stranger had already closed the distance. He did not strike to kill, yet, but he disarmed 3 men in less than a heartbeat. Their weapons clattered to the dusty street. Another tried to run, but the stranger moved faster, grabbing his coat and slamming him against a hover wagon. The fight was over before it truly began. The bandidos lay scattered, bruised, and terrified, while the stranger stood in the middle of the street. His breathing was calm. His eyes, barely visible under his hat, were steady and cold. The townsfolk emerged cautiously, their fear turning into awe. One old man whispered, "I've never seen a man move like that, not even in stories." The stranger did not speak. He never did. He simply retrieved the weapons he had collected, cleaned them of dust, and returned them to their owners. Then, as silently as he had come, he walked away, leaving the bandidos groaning and humiliated. But Scarred Ron was not finished. He slumped to his knees, blood dripping from a cut above his eye, and glared at the stranger's retreating figure. "This isn't over," he spat. "He'll pay for this humiliation, and when he does, he'll violate Turnaway into a hut. We'll make him regret ever coming to Dustfall." That night, the bandidos gathered in a hidden canyon outside town. Ron's plan was simple: lure the stranger into a trap, use numbers and firepower to overwhelm him. They captured a local merchant, a man who traded in rare minerals, and hid him in a crude cage. The plan was cruel, but they were desperate, and Ron believed he could outsmart a quiet stranger. Meanwhile, the stranger had already sensed the disturbance. He did not need anyone to tell him. Humans had instincts, enhanced instincts, sharpened by experience and training, that made them aware of danger before it arrived, and he had trained for this moment. As he moved toward the outskirts, he followed subtle signs the bandidos had left: disturbed dust, faint footprints, a shadow that did not belong. The desert night was quiet, but the stranger's senses were alive. Every sound, every movement, every flicker of light was a signal. The bandidos waited in the canyon, weapons ready, their prisoner trembling in the cage. They expected the stranger to fall for the trap, to run headlong into their ambush. But he did not run. He approached silently, using the shadows to hide, analyzing every angle, every escape route. The first bandit, seeing a figure move near the rocks, fired blindly. The stranger twisted, barely moving, and a bolt of plasma glanced off a rock beside him. In the same instant, he used a small magnetic grappling device to disarm the attacker, pulling the weapon from his hand without ever touching the man. Panic spread among the bandidos. "He's faster than anything alive," one screamed. Another lunged, knife raised, but the stranger sidestepped, grabbing the man's wrist and flipping him into the canyon wall. Every move was smooth, effortless, and precise. It was as if the stranger was everywhere at once, seeing all angles, anticipating every attack. The bandidos tried to fight together, but coordination meant nothing against speed and skill they could not comprehend. Each man fell or dropped his weapon in seconds. Scarred Ron watched, horrified, as his men were defeated without a single serious injury to the stranger. Finally, the stranger reached the cage. With a flick of his hand, the lock disengaged, freeing the merchant. The man fell to his knees, shaking. I thought he would kill me," he stammered. The stranger helped him stand. He did not speak. His expression was calm, unreadable, but his presence was commanding. The bandidos, still groaning and stunned, slowly realized their failure. Scarred Ron staggered forward, raising his fist. "This isn't over," he shouted. But the stranger only tilted his head slightly, as if acknowledging the threat without fear. Then, without a word, he walked away into the desert night, leaving the bandidos humiliated, defeated, and more afraid than ever. The merchant watched him go, whispering prayers of thanks. Dustfall itself seemed to hold its breath, watching the stranger disappear into the horizon. The twin moons cast pale light across the desert, illuminating a figure who had moved faster than bullets, fought faster than men, and fought without cruelty. By the next morning, the story of the silent stranger spread farther than the town itself. Travelers brought tales to nearby settlements. A man who could move faster than the eye could follow, who fought without malice, and who could dismantle an entire gang alone. The HFY element was clear. Humans, even one human, could surpass what others considered possible. It was not strength alone, nor weapons alone. It was training, instinct, courage, and the ability to think faster than anyone else. And in Dustfall, a lesson had been learned. Provoking a human could bring unexpected consequences. Quiet, calm, and unassuming, yet faster and smarter than anyone dared imagine. Scarred Ron lay in the canyon, nursing his wounds, fury burning in his chest. "Next time," he hissed, "we'll be ready. He won't escape us. He can. Not again." But even as he spoke, the winds of the desert carried the stranger's figure farther away. Silent, fast, unstoppable. And Dustfall had only begun to understand the power of a human they had underestimated. The night passed, dust settled, and the stranger, moving through shadows and light, prepared for whatever might come next, knowing the bandidos would not rest, and neither would he. The desert beyond Dustfall was quiet and vast. Twin moons hung in the sky like pale eyes watching the land below. The wind carried red dust and the faint hum of distant hover wagons. Life went on in Dustfall, but the townsfolk could not forget the silent stranger. Stories of his speed and skill had already spread, whispered in every corner of the town. But the bandidos were not finished. Scarred Ron's pride burned hotter than the desert sun. To lose twice to one man, a quiet, silent human, was unacceptable. His gang gathered in a hidden canyon, licking their wounds and sharpening their weapons. They had learned from their last failure. This time, there would be no mistakes. Ron spoke to his men in a low, dangerous voice. "We've been humiliated twice now. He's fast, yes. But he's only one man, and one man can be trapped. We take what he values, and we force him to come to us." The gang's plan was simple, but cruel. They captured a local trader, an older man who transported rare minerals to settlements beyond Dustfall. The man was well-liked in town, gentle and honest. His capture would draw the stranger out, and Ron was certain he could ambush him once he arrived. The bandidos set their trap in a narrow canyon to the east of Dustfall. The canyon was rugged, with jagged rocks, sudden drops, and echoing tunnels. It was the perfect place for an ambush, or so they thought. They hid behind boulders, hover wagons, and fallen beams, weapons ready. Plasma pistols, shock knives, and energy whips glimmered in the moonlight. Meanwhile, the silent stranger moved with calm precision. He had sensed the disturbance almost immediately. Humans had instincts that went beyond sight or sound. Even from Dustfall, he could detect subtle changes in the wind, faint echoes of hurried footsteps, and the trembling heartbeats of the bandidos hiding in the canyon. He walked slowly along the desert ridge, his coat flowing behind him. Each step was deliberate. He did not rush. He did not panic. He did not speak. Yet his mind was alive, calculating, preparing. He knew the bandidos would try something cruel. He also knew that to catch him unprepared was impossible. In the canyon, Scarred Ron and his men waited. They whispered nervously. "He'll be here soon," one said. "And then he'll regret ever coming to Dustfall." "Quiet," Ron hissed. "Not a word. Stay alert." Hours passed. The canyon was silent except for the occasional hoot of a desert owl and the distant hum of hover wagons in Dustfall. Then, suddenly, a shadow moved along the ridge above. The stranger was there. He had arrived, calm and deliberate, not running, not charging, just walking. Ron signaled his men. "Now!" Plasma bolts flashed in the canyon. The bandidos had hoped to surprise him, but the stranger had anticipated their plan. He moved like liquid through the rocks, faster than the eye could follow. One bolt passed harmlessly over his shoulder. Another ricocheted off a boulder. He ducked, rolled, and twisted, dodging every attack with impossible speed. One bandit tried to run from him. The stranger was already there, grabbing his coat and flipping him into a rock wall. Another lunged with a knife, but the stranger grabbed his wrist and used his momentum to throw him over a hover wagon. The fight was a blur, almost impossible to watch. The townsfolk, who had followed the stranger's movements from a distance, gasped. How can one man move like this? They wondered, he is faster than any human should be. Scarred Ron's fury grew. "Stop him! Kill him!" he shouted, but his men were falling one by one. The stranger's movements were precise, never cruel, but unstoppable. Then the stranger approached the cage. The trader inside was trembling, eyes wide with fear. "Please, don't let them hurt me," he whispered. The stranger knelt slightly, examining the lock. A small device from his coat clicked into place. In moments, the cage door swung open. He helped the trader to his feet, keeping his eyes on the remaining bandidos. The last few men tried to regroup, charging as one. But the stranger anticipated their moves. He used a combination of speed, magnetic grapples, and clever tricks to disarm them without striking fatally. One was flipped into a boulder, another was pulled back by a grappling line, tangled helplessly. Scarred Ron's fury turned to disbelief. He ran forward, swinging a heavy energy whip. The stranger sidestepped calmly, letting the whip crack against a rock behind him. Then, in the same instant, he moved, faster than Ron could track. His hand grabbed Ron's arm, twisting it gently but firmly. Ron dropped the whip, stumbling. "You can't be human," Ron gasped, more in shock than in pain. The stranger said nothing. He only tilted his head slightly, a small acknowledgement of Ron's presence. Then he moved again, retrieving the traitor and leading him out of the canyon. His steps were silent, his movements unhurried, yet every action was perfect. By the time he reached the canyon's exit, the bandidos were disarmed, humiliated, and terrified. They had tried everything, yet they had failed. Not a single strike had harmed him. Not a single shot had touched him. The traitor, now safe, looked at the stranger in awe. How did you do that?" he asked, voice trembling. The stranger only shook his head slightly and continued walking. He did not speak. He did not explain. He simply moved through the shadows toward Dustfall, leaving the bandidos behind. Scarred Ron sank to his knees in the canyon. "Next time," he muttered, "we'll be ready. We will not fail again." But he already knew, deep down, that the silent stranger was more than any one man should be. Faster, smarter, stronger in ways that could not be measured. In Dustfall, the townsfolk waited. They had watched the events unfold from a distance, witnessing the stranger's impossible skill. Children whispered to each other, merchants told neighbors, and even the sheriff shook his head in disbelief. "Humans," one trader said quietly, "are more than we ever imagined. One man alone can change everything." The stranger had already disappeared into the desert night. The canyon behind him was silent, broken only by the groans of defeated bandidos and the soft footsteps of the freed trader. The HFY element was clear. Humans, even one, could exceed limits that others considered impossible, not through strength alone, but through skill, intelligence, and courage. Even in the face of overwhelming danger, a single human could prevail. The bandidos would plan again. They would scheme, set traps, and try to humiliate him. But the stranger was ready. He had seen their tactics, anticipated their moves, and prepared for every eventuality. As he walked into the night, the twin moons casting pale light over the desert, Dustfall slept uneasily. The town had been tested, and humans had shown their strength in a way no one could ignore. And somewhere beyond the horizon, the silent stranger's legend was growing. A man who did not speak, did not boast, but moved faster than bullets, thought faster than men, and acted with precision beyond comprehension. The bandidos, plotting their revenge in the canyon, would soon learn that provoking such a human was not just foolish, it was dangerous. And the desert whispered the truth. Those who challenge humans must be prepared to face consequences they cannot even imagine. Dustfall was quiet in the early evening, but the air was thick with tension. The twin moons hung low over the desert horizon, casting pale light across the town. The streets were nearly empty, but every shadow seemed alive with whispers of the silent stranger. Even the wind carried a sense of anticipation. The bandidos had returned. Scarred Ron and his gang were more determined than ever. They had spent days planning, training, and arming themselves with new weapons, plasma rifles, shock grenades, and traps designed to contain their foe. Their pride burned hotter than any desert sun. Failure was no longer an option. "We've been humiliated too many times," Ron growled, pacing in the shadow of the cliffs that edged the town. "This time we take him down or we die trying. And this time, there will be no mercy." The other bandidos nodded, their faces hard, their hands steady on weapons. They had learned from previous encounters, and they believed their numbers and strategy could finally trap the stranger. They had chosen the perfect location, the edge of town, where the streets met the cliffs overlooking the canyon. The area was narrow, with jagged rocks, a crumbling hover bridge, and little room to maneuver. Meanwhile, the stranger had already sensed the danger. He moved calmly along the rooftops of Dustfall, eyes scanning every shadow, every corner, every movement. He did not hurry. He did not speak. Yet his mind was alive, analyzing, calculating, preparing for every eventuality. The townsfolk watched from safe vantage points, hearts pounding, knowing something was about to happen. Whispers passed through the streets. "He is coming. The one who is faster than any man, he is here." Scarred Ron waited with his men at the planned ambush. They had left no detail unchecked. Nets hung from the cliffs, magnetic traps lined the hover bridge, and shock mines were hidden under the dust. They were ready. And then, from the shadows, the stranger appeared. He walked calmly into the narrowed street, his long coat flowing behind him. His hat shaded his eyes, but the townsfolk could see the quiet confidence in his posture. Ron raised his hand. "Now!" he shouted. The bandidos attacked in unison, their weapons blazing. Plasma bolts streaked through the night air, illuminating the dust and rocks in flashes of blue and red. But the stranger was already moving. He was everywhere at once, twisting, dodging, and countering with impossible speed. One man's shot missed by inches. Another was disarmed before he could even pull the trigger. The town held its breath. The stranger moved like a shadow, silent and deadly, yet careful not to strike with unnecessary force. He used his grappling device to swing over obstacles, magnetic pulses to disarm attackers, and precise strikes to neutralize the bandido's advantage. Scarred Ron lunged with a plasma rifle, aiming carefully at the stranger. But the man anticipated the movement. With a flick of his wrist, a magnetic line wrapped around the weapon, pulling it from Ron's hands before he could fire. Ron stumbled backward, disbelief flashing in his eyes. The fight moved toward the cliff's edge. The hover bridge shook underfoot as the bandidos tried to flank him. But the stranger was already there, twisting and dodging with perfect precision. He used the narrow terrain to his advantage, allowing the attackers' own momentum to defeat them. One man fell into the canyon below, grabbing desperately for a ledge but losing his grip. Another was tangled in his own energy whip. The townsfolk gasped. No one could be this fast. No one could fight like that. But Scarred Ron was not finished. He had a small device, a pulse grenade, designed to disrupt movement and slow the stranger. He threw it with deadly precision, and it exploded in a blinding flash of energy. The stranger reacted instantly. He ducked behind a rock, the grenade's energy passing harmlessly over his head. In a single motion, he launched a grappling line, pulling the nearest bandit toward him, using the man's momentum to knock another off balance. The fight became a blur, shouts, flashes, and motion too fast for the eye to follow. Then silence. The stranger stood in the center of the chaos. Not a scratch, not a mark on his coat. Not a single weapon had touched him. Scarred Ron and the remaining bandidos were scattered, stunned, and terrified. Ron's fury boiled over. "Enough!" he shouted, charging at the stranger with a shock blade. "You can't escape me!" The stranger tilted his head, calm as ever. With a simple movement, he sidestepped Ron, using his momentum to flip him into a rock wall. The blade clattered to the ground. Ron groaned, dazed and furious. You are impossible, Ron gasped, struggling to rise. The stranger said nothing. He moved toward the remaining bandidos, disarming them with speed and precision. None of them could follow his motions. None could anticipate his next move. They were trapped, not by weapons, but by skill far beyond their understanding. Finally, only scarred Ron remained standing. He raised his hands, trembling with fury and fear. I give up, he spat, but this is not the end. You cannot stay in one place forever. We will find you again. The stranger tilted his head slightly, acknowledging the threat. Then, without a word, he walked to the edge of the cliff, where the canyon below stretched wide and deep. He looked out over the desert horizon, the twin moons casting pale light on the jagged rocks below. The townsfolk emerged from hiding, watching him silently. No one moved. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The stranger's presence filled the space with quiet authority, a calm power that spoke louder than any weapon. The HFY element was clear. Humans, even one human, could surpass what others considered impossible, not through sheer strength alone, but through skill, intelligence, courage, and determination. One man, calm and precise, could stand against a group of men armed and dangerous, and prevail. Scarred Ron and the bandidos slunk away, humiliated and defeated, their pride shattered. They had underestimated the silent stranger, and the lesson was harsh and clear. Humans are not to be provoked, not to be underestimated. The stranger turned from the canyon edge and began to walk back toward the town. He did not seek glory. He did not speak. His mission was simple: protect the innocent, neutralize the threat, and leave. The townsfolk watched in awe as he passed. Children whispered to their parents. Merchants nodded silently, and even the sheriff, a man who had seen many fights, stood still, unable to speak. The stranger's legend was growing, faster than the wind, quieter than shadows, and stronger than fear itself. By dawn, stories of the night's events spread beyond dustfall. Travelers carried tales of the silent human who moved faster than bullets, thought faster than men, and fought with precision beyond imagination. Nearby towns and settlements would soon learn to respect humans in ways they had never expected. The bandidos would regroup, they would plan again. But one truth remained: facing a human like this, silent, fast, unstoppable, was dangerous beyond measure. And as the sun rose over Dustfall, the stranger disappeared once more into the desert, leaving only footprints in the dust and whispers in the wind. He was a reminder, a warning, and a legend in the making. Those who provoked him would remember. Those who witnessed him would never forget. Humans, even one, could change the course of events, protect the innocent, and overcome impossible odds, all with calm, precise skill and unmatched courage. Dustfall slept uneasily that morning, the memory of the battle still fresh. The town had been tested, and humans had proven their worth, and somewhere beyond the horizon, the silent stranger continued his journey, ready for whatever challenge awaited next.